Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified with your host, Eric Taylor, and myself, Shiva Maharaj. Today, we have the Cyber Matt Lee. What's up, Matt? What's going on?
What's going on? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for coming. I'm really happy you could make it on. We've been trying to get you on for quite some time, but your schedule is busier than the Pope's or Eric's, I think, these days.
I'm so happy to be home for 10 days, guys. Like, this is legit. It's stoked. So
I felt like I was back in, you and me going back and forth on LinkedIn. I thought I was back in high school trying to court a girl way back. I mean, kind of showing my age a little bit there, but
well, it would have been in folded notes.
Did you send them
folded notes at the time?
Did you send them
check yes or no? Oh,
ASL. Currently, I am these two conditions, and in this airport, but no ASL.
So one of the things that I guess stoked your interest for this particular episode is VDPs. So
Yeah.
Eric, you want to kick that off?
what is a VDP? No,
You can take penicillin for it, I think.
Let's actually dig into that, because there are some people who own security companies who don't know what a VDP is.
yeah, this is true.
It happened to Eric last week.
Yeah. No, I think even if they do know, it's buried or it's tangentialized, right? Because what we're talking about obviously is disclosure programs, right? Vulnerability or vendor, either way you want to state it in a term. But ultimately, we're discussing disclosure programs, right? I found a vulnerability. I found a weakness. I found something you should heal. I found something that's this, right? And you have this community, this whole community of humans that want to answer those questions and hopefully want to be paid and enumerated for their services, right? For their enumeration services. And I think having a good program is actually pretty nuanced, and there's some positives to it. There's some negatives to it. But if I wanted to vote just in a TLDR fashion, yes, you should absolutely have a well-funded, well-structured, and able to act on their own accord, separate sprint teams, vulnerability disclosure program or vendor disclosure program. So yeah, sorry, that's my initial position is you should have one, and it should be well-funded and well-structured.
I think that wraps it up. Have a great day, everybody. No,
All right. Thanks, gents and ladies. No,
You can reach Matt at cybermattlee.com. So
great. That's great.
what have you seen and I hate to start with a negative, but what have you seen the failings of most of the VDPs out there? And you don't have to call out any vendors specifically, but what can they do better?
They're not. So here's what I've heard before from vendors, because I do a lot of vendor analysis. That's part of what my new role is at Paxate, some of the technology reviews and these questions. And so when you start talking about it, there'll be two types. You'll have this category of people that don't have a well-defined or any type of vendor disclosure program. So they're just letting their employees receive emails, right, Eric? Like you and I, our relationship. And so if you don't have that well-structured, that's one category. The other is where they've come into it half-heartedly or maybe ill-informed, or potentially as you start thinking about corporate structure, it might only exist in the engineering team, but it doesn't exist at a board level. It's not bought into at some high-level capacitance from a security team perspective. And so what happens then is you'll get people finding disclosures if you've scoped it well. Sometimes you don't scope it well, and then all you do is get trash anyway, right? Or you've limited it so much there's no value in it. But the point is, if you get a well-funded stream of these disclosures, right? 10, 15 a week, whatever it may be, 5, 2, whatever the number is that it works out to be, you often don't have the ability to slipstream those fixes into the grander problem, right? Especially if you have this large monolithic code base and the inability to be flexible and fast on certain small service objects, right? Where you have maybe a service-oriented or microservice-oriented model. And so you run into just a giant backlog, right? Like, joking aside, I was making this comment on LinkedIn, and it's one of the guys that was at a pretty well-known defense contractor actually said, I've got a backlog of 574 things to fix. I can't get any time from engineering. It's a joke. Having a disclosure program is a joke. True.
Kaseya's in the defense department.
Hey, me, I'm not saying.
That was my one for the episode with you. So.
I got you. Yeah, you know me, I won't. But the point is that, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Oh yeah, from my side of the fence, because a lot of people know we are IR, we are a bunch of hackers, and especially we like to break things, as Matt's come to learn working, at different companies he's worked at. Like, hey, Matt, look at this.
Love it. Yeah. But it's what the threat actors are doing, right? Like, let's just be honest with ourselves. The reason this matters is it's the way the attack surface is delivered, right? And it's the same way a threat actor would do, is enumerate and start to find chinks in the armor. So anyway, sorry.
One thing I was going to say was, you've got some of the stuff, most of the stuff, just to be in fairness, that I'm posting, at least to you and your group, it's pretty low level stuff, right? It's a bunch of O nesting.
Hygienic.
Exactly.
Right? And sometimes.
Sometimes. But how much are you getting that just look like Nessus scans and just in-app scans and just pure garbage?
Well, you say that, but like in the same breath, you kind of should be doing those external vulnerability scans so that you don't have much on that surface area, right? Like there's a reason Nessus has the stuff they do is here's a vulnerability that could be exploited. And you're like, I have a compensating control. Yeah, but you'd still want to probably fix that. Like if you can at some point under that advice. But yeah, to your point, tons. I mean, most of the things that people would send are that, hey, look at what I found. And here's my scan that I paid $3,000 a year for and ran against your org.
But the problem with that, not the problem with that, we're under sustained attack, right? There's no real slowdowns. And with all of the various types of escalation and elevation vulnerabilities out there, you can't afford to overlook anything. You almost have to put time, money, and resource into everything that's brought to you, because if you don't, where are you in the liability chain should that be exploited 2-3 months down the line and you ignored it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it though is like, for example, and I'll go to a specific one, like, let's say you have your security.txt in your well-known folder. Getting 3,000 reports about that when you've chosen to leave that OSINT breadcrumb there that's not true. And I know on a security.txt what the reason for modification of that would be, right? But the point is, if I got that from 3,500 researchers, that's just going to clutter up the masses of what you'd have to respond to look for and delineate those. And I think you can make systems to figure that out, right? But yeah, but ultimately, I think you're right. I just think that when you zoom in enough, there's some cases where you'd want to have a defined leave this alone. And I think that comes back to, here's what you should do. Define a well-structured disclosure program so you can set those rules and you can say what I'm finding acceptable. People can argue whether they like them or not, but at least having one and having an established space where you can actually do that at least sets the ground rules. Even if a security researcher like Eric reads it and Shiva reads it and goes, this is horse shit. There's nothing included in here, right? Like I get it, but at least it's defined and you set what those parameters are so you can focus on the majors, right? But
yeah, a scope of work, a good scope of work is needed. I mean,
and I'm not discounting your point either, Shiva, but I agree with your point as well. So.
I mean, I haven't looked at ConnectWise recently, but when they first came out and put their disclosure program on HackerOne, it was like, hey, we got a bug bounty, submitted email. I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? There's no scope. There's nothing in limit. There's nothing out of limit.
Exactly.
Even the basic scope of like, do not take down our infrastructure. No DDoS it. Right. It's at a minimum.
But they were coming in off of their back foot. That because if I remember correctly, June-ish of 2020, they had a vulnerability that was exploited.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the SQL towards that.
Right. I mean, it's relatively public, whatever. I don't think it was abused the way that Kaseya was. And I know I'm smiling, but that's wrong. But
yeah,
they had to scramble to get that program out there to also build partner confidence in them.
Yeah. And I know the people that are involved in that, at least at that field level, the Tom Gricos of the world. And I think their heart is in the right place. I think that, it takes a little bit to turn a big ship and solve some of those things, but you have seen less lawsuits and more inclusion in the space for people like Jason that scream loudly about some of their deficiencies. And he was actually invited in several of their what do you call them? Events to speak, even though he was going to be speaking about things that were kind of a punch in the nuts. So it feels like they're turning the boat in that regard.
I mean, you have to, right? It's not like the old days of suing people to shut up doesn't work because people understand you get sued, you're going discoverable.
Yeah. Well, even if you took it away from that, I think the challenge is if you're in a maturing market, if you're actually working with the Pareto principle playing out, you'll have MSPs that have enough to lose that this will become very loud and very public, right? And so I think you're probably right about that statement. So, yeah.
So if you had to build a VDP program, what are your top 3 things? Eric hates when I do this, but what are your top 3 things you would put first and foremost into that program?
That.
I know what you would.
Yeah.
Barricade Cyber, MFA, leave me alone.
If I had to say, what would it be? I would first, and I hate the it depends answer, but I think that is kind of the part you have to take into a grain of salt. But I would say you have to have a dedicated sprint team. That's at least my opinion. I think you have to have someone to take those things, vet them, and then run them through the code base and find ways to solve it and actually get preference. In lieu of that, if you don't have a dedicated sprint team, you have to show how you're funding these projects internally so they can compete with things that are revenue driving, right? Some way of tying a number to what this vulnerability means in loss that can equate or outweigh what number exists for a revenue opportunity. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a builder of a product and it's a widget product and it's this one on the web. And you have customers that are saying, listen, if I can only get feature 7 placed in right now, I'm going to buy, and I have this many opportunities. And they tie seats to it and they tie size to it and revenue. Well, if you come in saying, hey, I think our platform has an email weakness that could be exploited, and we're going to need to deal with this, and it's going to have to take this much recoding, and it's going to take this many parts of your sprint cycles, 5 of them of the 6, and we're going to need to, then the revenue number outweighs that. And so if you don't have a dedicated sprint team that can take precedence and do that, and enough of a flexibility in your code base to even do that, then you'd have to fund these things as if they were funded revenue opportunities, right? So I think my first part is around money, or is around the operational workload. Right? Either have a team that can do this or have the ability to fund it so it fights against other product because it weighs out in a larger number, right? And kind of the concept. The second piece that I would say you have to have in place for that would be adequate scoping. Like, know yourself, know where your code base is, know where your risk is, know who owns what piece of your world, who owns your DNS, who owns your A records, know the enumerability, right? So some centric point to know the enumerability and continue to refine the scope. Continue to refine what can we actually action on. Like, a great example would be some of these vendors probably know their code base has to be completely rewritten into a container-based methodology or some type of ephemeral workloads or things that are modern coding practices, right? With their own kind of software development lifecycle, having security built in at the ground up. But in order to do that, they might have to pause all operations going forward or fund it with a $10 million funding round and those type of things. And I think, those are hard decisions that executives need to be involved in. And so I think for that second piece is that you have to have executive involvement and understanding of knowing yourself, right? So those are the second set of concepts. And maybe I'm cheating, Shiva, and including bucketed concepts. But I think if you don't have this knowledge of what surface area you're trying to protect and what the data is worth behind it, and executive understanding and buy-in, then you're going to fail every time you try to go up and ask for more budget. You're going to fail every time you try to ask for these things because you're not giving executives a real picture of whether their business is even viable. I believe there are some of these vendors, their business is not viable because the work that would have to come to overcome their tax, if you will, their legacy debt is so much that they couldn't outrun their operational needs for revenue and the costs and structure and build and modernizing and all the things they're still doing in their applications. And so I short story is executive involvement is really, 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 really critical. And then, from a third piece, it would really just be making sure that you have somebody own that operation in your org chart so that you have someone that's responsible for how we're responding to people, the public image aspect of what we're doing. And so that you're not turning away something that's not real, right? That should be dealt with, but you're maintaining a good relationship with these partners, with these outside security researchers. And I think it's just be humble, right? Like, be humble as a company. You're going to make shitty software. That's the way it works. You've got to be willing to make it less shitty. Right? And I think that's the goal. But yeah.
I can add on to that. Your first topic there was, about communication and stuff like that and your internal workflow. The one thing that you could take that on our side of the fence that really frustrates, especially me, and I know a bunch of other pen testers and stuff like that, have this problem of just pure communication. We submit something, at least have an autoresponder. Hey, got it. Give, in the autoresponder, that is duh. Yeah. Well, a lot of times we think that it's going to a black hole and we follow up in a couple of days. Hey, did you?
Yeah. But most times you're probably having a discovery issue there. They don't want to create more discoverable items. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, right?
Maybe.
Because I don't know. I mean, I think they need is a lawsuit against them. They go, Joe Schmo sent this to you and you ignored it, but here you sent out a confirmation that you received it. There's no plausible deniability.
I would wager. I mean, at least in the companies I've seen, it's almost like this childlike ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, kids don't know they're ignorant either; they're quite happy. But I feel like it's actually less on purpose and less thought out than that. I think a lot of people don't understand the responsibility that we have from a secure coding, secure environment, work with the public, we're so used to a world where businesses are sovereign intellectual property is intellectual property. The way we decide, this is something different where it's a collaborative effort. You have people that you couldn't even hire to be on your teams to do that research, even with context inside your environment, let alone the breadth. I feel like this is like a missed opportunity for crowdsourcing and a missed opportunity for companies for bringing in varied capabilities that you could never, ever hope to hire from a dream team perspective if you fund it right. I think they're just ignorant is my point, Shiva. I don't think companies are doing it maliciously.
I'm Debbie Downer.
But I'm the positive guy in the room. You can be.
That's what I was saying. I'm Debbie Downer.
We're yin yang. Yeah. It's all right.
One of the things that I wish I could see is more peer review amongst vendors.
Yeah, sure.
But
transparency and humility.
They're going to hide behind IP and this is our secret sauce. We don't want these guys to see it, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of products out there that have glaring security holes because security is not a core feature of their product.
Yeah.
And that disappoints me to the point where I'm trying to pare back how many tools I use because I just look at a new tool, no matter what it is or how good they are, as just another attack vector.
Yep.
Or 3 or 4 wrapped into one, you know?
You're 100%.
And this VDP, well, having a real VDP program is something that instills confidence for me.
100%.
And, you know, I don't care what size your MSP is, whether you're small like me or however large you are. You don't have that R&D budget for this kind of stuff. So you have to lean heavily on your vendors to provide that piece in the pie.
Yeah, I don't sit in the decision-making capacitance where I sit today in that regard. I'm obviously an influencer and a guide, but you know, I'll stand with you on that and say, I think if I was trying to assess supply chain risk, a very heavy factor in that would be what is their posture on VDP? Yeah. How do they handle disclosures? How do they handle letting those creators go and talk about their work? How do they handle how they treat the community around them? And that's so important to me, right? Because it's not just the disclosure. That's great. Go fix your problem. But there's some value in Eric Taylor going, let me demonstrate what I proved was possible after it's been patched, right? There's value in that. There's value in that corporate value for him. And I think what I get at, and you know, I'll be a CISO somewhere, someday. Today is not the day. But also in a world where CISOs are getting a seat at the table, where we're actually able to talk about, you know, security as a primary function in some companies, right? And so I do believe very heavily in a vendor disclosure program, and a well-funded one that should actually be percentages on profit charts, that should be part of how do we stay and continue to function, especially as privacy becomes a consideration. Once you see the privacy teeth happening, you know, where it's not about checking the box from a compliance perspective, it's about whether I lost the data, then I think the football shifts a bit, right? Because now it's if I lose data, then I pay, versus if I follow these protocols, I'm defensible. I don't have to pay even if I do lose data. That's a difference in those two methodologies, right? So,
so I got some stuff I want to drop massive buckets on. Yeah, I'm over here taking notes like feverishly of like, hey, let's ask about this. So I do want to circle back just for a moment, and then we'll get into the next question where we spoke about it a minute ago, but really people need to have a clear expectation of what's out of scope for this stuff. You know, some of the best ones are the best ones are, hey, this subdomain is not part of it because it's through a third party. That way we know, ooh, let's not fuck with that because we don't have the permission to deal with that stuff.
Yeah. Right. And I can't transfer that permission sometimes, right? Yeah, 100%.
Exactly. The one thing that I do see a lot of pushback, especially in my industry, is a lot of VDP programs, when you submit bugs, you are logged into an NDA. That's why you made the point a moment ago, you know, I'm going out and saying, oh, look what bug I found after after it's been patched. I'm not allowed to because of NDA programs. I'm like,
well, I think the NDA should just have timeframes on them, right? Like it's what's disclosable and what's not, or very defined. Like I do think some of this is your intellectual property. And I do believe from a very transparent perspective, and right. And so I come from it that way. A lot of companies don't. They think they want to control the public image themselves comparative to, I'd rather just be out there. I would prefer to have this in an uncontrolled manner and then be better and try to be better and then try to be better, right? Like I don't want to hide behind things. I don't know. It's just my opinion. But
well, the thing is with most partner programs, anything you divulge to a vendor becomes their property for most of the big vendors.
Yeah.
So even if you submit a vulnerability there and you're not part of the VDP program, your partnership program governs you.
I have one with Microsoft right now. I mean, and I think they are actually an example of one where I'm actually allowed to disclose, I believe, after. As long as they've cleared it, I think I'm good to disclose.
Which is fair, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you've cleared it and the solution's been vetted, okay, great. Let's inform people what was going on, and
Me
maybe
too. I think that's huge.
And maybe, they can go back and search their systems to see if they've been exploited, using SolarWinds as the example, right? You know what the TTPs used were. So here are your YARA rules. Go see what happened if anything happened.
Yep.
And, to quote you, that raises the tide of the industry. And I think our industry is more than just MSPs. It's the break fix guys. It's the IT consultants, the TNM, and everybody else. And I feel like as a MSP or MSP adjacent, we get lost in being in our own little world of MSP. But when someone gets breached, it's an IT provider. It's not an MSP. It's not a consultant.
Yeah.
So,
and Lord,
and I
a beauty firm ever gets breached. Oh,
well, and FireEye. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, we're still seeing some of the outcomes of Microsoft source code and FireEye and SolarWinds. I mean, that's still playing out today. I mean, there's been 96 Microsoft 0 days this year as a result, presumably, of some of those compromisations. But I think part of this is that the seas of public perception have to shift and are shifting, right? I think people think of it as, in the past, oh, well, if they've ever had a venereal disease, then I'm probably not ever sleeping with them again. And that's just real fear, right? Even though in reality, that might be one that's curable. And I hate to get crass on this, but the point is we treat a breach or a incident or a failure of a security team in a delivery of some application as something that's sacrosanct, that should just never, ever happen. That's horse shit. It's going to happen. You're going to fail. It's about how you've defended yourself, how you've worked to fix those disclosures. Hopefully it's Eric finding it, not somebody that's enumerating an attack surface, right? And I think that that's why I lever so hard on the vendor disclosure program. But if the public's perception doesn't shift from this is just the worst thing in the world, then companies would not have to keep fighting it. And I don't mean to be like giving it as an excuse for companies, but if the perception is you're horrible because you had an incident, then then we have to hide all incidents. But if your perception is incidents happen, how you respond to them, how quickly you fix them, how fast you're able to recover, how much, those things are what should be attached to that story, and it should be very loud. And if we do that, shitty companies go away, right? And good companies rise to the top.
I don't disagree with you. I think everyone's going to get popped. It's a matter of when, and you should be judged on how you respond. But one thing I want to ask you is, do you think the public cares anymore? Because I'm working under the assumption that they've been so desensitized to ransomware attacks, until it actually happens to them, it's just noise in the ether to them.
Ish. I mean, I think you have you have a curve anytime you have some kind of new thing happen in populist understanding, at least according to Matt Lee's opinion. But if you look back at like the Industrial Revolution, you look at things that we determined as that world evolved, or building codes, for example, in a locale, or, water management codes, or name them. They're all born out of this kind of like desensitization of the risk, this kind of, oh my God, and then events that happen. And they're so big that they just change stuff, right? Like the one I can think of in Industrial Revolution is the ladies burned to death in the sewing machine room, right? Where they locked them in because they had locks until it was break time. And that way nobody ever cheated their workload. Right. And so you had this thing, well, it changed. Now you have push bars to exit buildings, right? You have an emergency exit everywhere you go as a result of people dying in a building. And so, yes, I think the public is somewhat desensitized, or if anything, even kind of somewhat ignorant towards it in the beginning, where the only news articles that really hit general public right now are JBS, Colonial Pipeline, right? And SolarWinds, barely. And so if you look at that from a public perspective, it's not that they're, tone deaf to it. It's just that there's not enough actual discussion around it being part of our life. I mean, I don't think they're desensitized. I think it's just scarce material. We're in it. We hear it every day.
I think, with social media, they're hearing it a lot more than they would just from traditional news sources.
True story. Yeah.
I'd say probably 25% of my feed are IT people. The rest are whoever, and a couple of deep fakes probably. So, when something happens, and yes, I'm more sensitive because I'm an informed consumer, so I should know about it. At least I would hope I do. You get, 100, 150 people posting the same link about the same narrative, about the same thing. And I feel we're at a point where the end consumer is just like, yeah, it's going to happen. So everyone seems to recover. We'll figure it out when it does happen. And I think that's one of the more dangerous stances a company can take.
Totally.
Because if you lose that data, your business is done.
Yeah, the good news is, like, everybody focuses on the A in the CIA triad, right? Everybody focuses on this availability component. I got to have backups. My system needs to be up quick. I need to have this, but they don't actually think about the C and the I part very much, like the confidentiality and integrity aspect of it. Maybe a little integrity from the way they look at backups, but ultimately not much about the C at all. And so I think that, we're going to have teeth that change this. And we're starting to see it. I mean, in the form of privacy laws and legislation, I can tell you, I haven't seen companies move more than trying to solve a GDPR issue. I haven't seen companies move more than trying to solve a CCPA issue. I haven't seen companies. And so as you start seeing privacy having a different barrier to entry, right? And I'll explain that. What I mean by that is that in a traditional, compliance-based architecture where the fines are based on what you did or didn't do against your policies and procedures, means you can define fucked up policies and procedures and shitty ass compliance controls. And as long as you did them, you're good. Even if they had no efficaciousness on the ability to actually protect oneself, right? As in with the Privacy Act or in a CUI type exposure model or the things we're starting to see, you actually have this, if it's exposed, you fail. Right. It doesn't matter how compliant you were, you failed. You're gonna have to pay your constituency. Here's the monitoring cost. Here's the amount they can sue you, $1,000 per record. This is what's suable. Sometimes it's the state, sometimes it's consumers, which makes it even more interesting. You will start seeing people want defensibility and finding actual solutions for these things, I think, because of the teeth of that. And so do consumers care or not? I think that's going to change when they start getting sued out of existence.
But going back to HIPAA, because that's my favorite compliance, I think it's the most effective one. There's nothing there. Let's just use that across the
trashy. But yeah, I hope you're being sarcastic as all get out. Okay, good.
You look at that, and I know a lot of IT guys. They're so afraid of HIPAA, and you should be, because it's meant to do better, right, or be better.
Yeah.
But the way the system is created, you can appeal these things. And you
can also write your own policies and procedures that make you not necessarily like, I'm only going to disclose a breach if it's X, and then you define your own reasons and you might follow that policy. Sometimes it's defensible in HIPAA, right?
What I'm saying is, once you get to the appeal portion, HHS, more times than not that I've seen firsthand, they forget to come back to re-audit you, to close the loop on that incident or hack or whatever it was. And what says that's going to change with any new compliance? The New York Shield Act is really good, in my opinion, and I'm not being sarcastic.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
That they define a breach as unauthorized access, not even exfiltration, which to me is what it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I think you get into the deepest conversation of just happened the other day. I just took pictures of it with my phone. Right, I didn't egress it. I just looked at it, and then I was good. I just took a picture of it. I don't have to, right? Especially when you're talking about controlled and locked down assets. Sometimes that's enough. So I agree with you on unauthorized access. I think what you have though is you should be able to define what the unauthorized access has access to, right? In the sense of it should be defined of not just unauthorized access, but unauthorized access of protected data sets, which means you have to know where your data is. You have to know how it's protected. You need to know where it lives. You need to, right?
Blasphemy. That doesn't exist. There's no technology for that. DLP is a unicorn.
It doesn't even exist. And I think though that, you start getting into, if something has unauthorized access and touches data that's protected, $1,000 an entry, I think, is what the New York Shield Act is sitting at. In fact, the First American Financial Corp, I don't think that's been solved yet, but they were looking at 84 million records. $1,000 a piece, like $8 billion fine. Like, if my math's correct, like,
what happened there?
What happened? It hasn't finished. I don't think it's finished. I think it's still in legislation. I don't think you'd ever see a fine like that. I think it would be company crippling, or you'd have state ownership of companies, right? Is what you'd start seeing. But I think that something with more teeth, like Shield, and California, if I recall, allows public citizenry to sue based on those parameters. And so I think you're going to see these things continue to shape. And ultimately, I think you'll see a national standard born that has enough teeth that it's not the parking lot budget for Home Depot after 4 years of litigation, right? But as a tiny slap on the wrist.
How much of that is B2C versus B2B?
I'm not sure I follow what you mean by that. Help me out.
Business to consumer versus business to business. Right? Because the consumer has far more rights in that kind of scenario than a business to business breach.
But less mature too, in the same right? Like, so more rights, but less aware of those rights and less apt to do something about those rights. Whereas a B2B would have, potentially less rights, but much more apt to do something about.
They should be, right? Yeah. So I think they should be held to the same level as the B2C.
Yeah, I agree. I think data sharing relationships and definement of where the data is, like, we have to become data centric, right? Like as an industry, we've always been, problem centric, or we've been proactive centric, but we've never really been data centric to say, where's the data? What's its value? What's its risk of exposure? What do we need to do with it? Do I need escalating controls to fix and protect it? Like,
I wish there was a common data model. I know it's near impossible with all the bits and pieces you want to get into, but use our industry as the example. You have an RMM, you have data there. You have a PSA, you have data there. You have a documentation platform. You have this new unicorn of an MSP platform.
Yeah.
You have the same copy of data sitting in 5 or 6 places. And how many people are sanitizing that data if they no longer use that system?
Yeah, or even have a data lifecycle in that system, right? Like you're saying towards your point. Have something that says, hey, if I don't have this customer in here, this has to be trimmed out. And how do I trim it? And do the feature sets exist to trim it? Like, yeah, 100%, bro. Like, yeah, definitely. And that's just one example of data that exists in the different thousands of industries and forms it might play in. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes with some of the cool things that are happening in our industry, right? In the sense that some of the variables are getting smaller. If I used to have, and I'll just talk through it, and I'm being oversimplified, but let's say I had a server and I installed an OS on it, right? But then I had a server and I installed a hypervisor, a layer 1 hypervisor, and then I installed several OSs on it. And then I moved those OSs to the cloud. And then but now I use this identity provider, whether it's Okta, Google, Microsoft, whoever it may be. I use these SaaS applications. I mean, like if I'm fast forwarding 5 years, I'm thinking about how the world works as you put bolts together. What's nice about that, and also harder, is that you've shifted to an identity centric. You've shifted away from this, endpoint methodology. I mean, I think you'll still have to have endpoint deliverability and baselining and all those things. But the point being is you've shifted the focus away from thousands of variables to 5 main players and those known APIs, right? And 30 or 40 main bell curve applications that are used. Let's call it 100. You start being able to form scriptable responses to things that are orchestration at that layer. What that means, I say all that to say, is that instead of us hiring a bunch of engineers, we might have 3 or 4 engineers that write large scale scripts and integrations and capabilities around that. But we might be hiring people just to go have conversations about data, go have conversations about how to make someone better with their own tools, how to be more secure with their own stuff and more fast and flexible. And right, because I think these two can coincide. I think you can deliver security at the speed of business. I think it just has to be a pro service. It has to be a real engagement. It can't be why am I a VCIO? I don't know, Matt, because you like to talk about a lot of different servers. Like there's no barrier to me becoming that VCIO. There's no barrier to me becoming that vCISO or those things. And so I think though we're going to be able to focus on our industry, much like CPAs do, once everybody's using the same forms and once everybody's using the same things. And so I feel like that's where we're heading as an industry, is that less variables mean we have less technical aspects and more business and acumen and data and security centric things.
So going a little off script, if you can, where do you think, or which compliancy set do you think we should lean on as IT providers?
Yeah. And you and I talked about this before. I think the challenge is there isn't a regulation, which means it's all about picking a framework that you can follow and justify. 800-171, CMMC, those are fantastic because there's a vision. They absolutely are audited, and people that think they're experts today or are heading in the wrong direction are going to find out when it's audited, and it goes to another audit and another audit. But they're usually CUI centric. They're usually policies around CUI centric and things that are CUI or however you want to call it, controlled unclassified information. But, what I'm actually looking towards and leaning towards is more of a security framework. Right. So rather than it being a compliancy framework, much more of do you at least have the stupid boxes checked right? Right. And so I'm looking at CIS. CIS V8 is what I'm focusing on. I'm teaching a class on it right now. But it's really about more prescriptive actions of, at least at an MSP level. Maybe as a software developer, you might focus on the cloud security matrix or some of the other things that are much more code development centric. But as an MSP, it's about, how do I evaluate my supply chain risk? How do I evaluate this? What are my defensible strategies of how am I going to handle my firewalls? Do I need MFA? How am I going to handle, right? And so it's very prescriptive actions. So I'm more of a fan of the security-based framework of CIS or CCM if you're going to go down the cloud side of a developer. We're pursuing STAR. I am in my current company that I'm at, STAR registry for the CSA compliance, but CIS is very prescriptive. It's very consumable by, not make it negative, but a lower maturity potentially around cybersecurity MSP, because it's just more do this and do this. The challenge with any security framework, in my opinion, is a lot of them take it for a grain of salt that you know what you're doing a bit, right? Like if it says establish a program to track assets, well, I've got it established. I have a piece of chalk and a fucking chalkboard. Well, that may not be the best methodology to make that happen.
Can't
Right.
with a computer though.
You cannot. It is true. You'd have to get a picture of it. Right. But the challenge is that you start having varying degrees of even what something prescriptive could mean. Right. Because I could say, okay, do that. And I go build it in a vacuum and I have no idea what I'm doing. And then it's a piece of crap and it's not actionable. It's not usable. It's not true. It's not honest. And so I don't know where it solves. I don't know of a great audited framework that doesn't let you pencil whip your way through it from a just writing the right policies that are horse crap. And I think CMMC is the one that in my mind, in my dreams would be the perfect applicability because it does have some safeguards against that. Where SOC 2, I can just write anything I want. And as long as it's good, I'm good. Right.
Well, here's my problem with SOC 2, at least the way I've seen it. People go to SOC 2. People go to vendors and say, I need to see your SOC 2 report. They can't understand what's written in there to begin.
And you have no idea what the scope is comparative to overall scope.
But it doesn't apply to you. That's their operation. It's not you.
Yeah.
You know, you and I were on a call, or on many calls, about a year ago, a little more. And I took something you said and I implemented it. I made compliance/security framework a platform. So now once I onboard a client, they will check the boxes legitimately, and they will also have that security in place.
Yeah.
So when we fill out all of these, insurance questionnaires, whatever, we just print that out, append it to the application or the renewal, and it's like, dude, they have everything. They have the documentation. They have the proof of the documentation.
I can prove it. It's immutable. It's set up systemically and operationally. Like, yeah, totally.
And a lot of the insurance companies don't like that, by the way. They just want a self-attestation model that says, well, you said that. No, I said that, and I gave you this. So
I gave you the data that proves where the scope was, what I was able to do, what was in the, 100%.
And I think
but they're dying too. Gosh, the insurance companies have made actuarial bets for the last 3 years that are not paying off, right? Like they're getting hammered.
But they'll come back because they don't need to make money on it, right? They just need to break even.
Not lose.
Looks to break even.
Yeah.
So as far as that goes, listen, they made a lot of money in the early days of cyber insurance.
No doubt, right? True story. Let's not forget the other.
They may have lost a couple billion or 100 million in the last few years, but I'm pretty sure they're net or net positive. I don't think.
I don't think so. No, I think you're starting to see the evidence of that not being the case, right? You're starting to see this. I'm not paying for this, or hey, I need the Travelers with their great form like that. Like even all the way down to MFA on the switches, right? Stuff that was not part of most people's lives, right? Like that's huge.
So does that mean everybody needs a cloud managed switch?
And that's what it's driving it to, right? Like that is what as an operational scalability structure, you have real hard times extending radius in normal methodologies without going to some kind of cloud type solution. I mean, you could do it, but it's a lot of infrastructure.
What are your thoughts on VPN these days? Because a lot of the VPN provider, a lot of the firewalls out there, it's very janky, for lack of better words. I just can't think of a better one.
Yeah.
To set up MFA.
Yeah, I think, so you mean contextually at the MFA as an overall discussion or the MFA parts of it? Because MFA parts of it, trying to drop back from a local firewall to a radius endpoint that feeds off an LDAP-S source that then comes back to your main IDP, like, bleh. Yeah.
I'm just talking about
in general.
I need to get into the office via VPN.
Yeah.
It's miserable to set up MFA to begin with, but a lot of the firewall platforms right now don't actually support.
I would drive it through a SASE methodology. I mean, if I was going that route and had to do that, I'd do it as a secure access and service edge type methodology. Maybe it's not full SASE capabilities, but certainly even this asset inside my organization needs connectivity. I'm going to reach it out through an edge that allows me to have my edge reach into that based on parameters set out here. And so some of those type of capabilities allow you to then do your IDP as like maybe Azure Active Directory and it built into that type of MFA and conditional access structure. That would be my preference. I'm working with 3 vendors right now that I know of that are building a lot of that product for the MSP space to solve.
Which 3, if you can say?
I cannot. But you'll see them as time goes. And I will say that because me, I'll have public stuff, but right now it's non-public. But SASE Edge.
I'll ask. You just tell me shut up. I'm good with that.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, but SASE Edge is probably the answer to most of that. And then you're agnostic to the firewall for the most part. It's either going to be some kind of encapsulated VPN at the firewall edge to send traffic to the SASE edge, right? So that you have that as your outgoing, or it'll be a Velo cloud type delivered model where it's just part of kind of your BGP strategy that brings you that SASE edge to connect those office resources. I've even seen some some really creative ones where it's agent based on that endpoint. So let's say it's an IIS server or something. That IIS server edge only becomes available to the agent that runs in that space through that SASE edge. And so now you don't even expose any full level network encapsulation. You expose new risks, but you don't expose that full level network encapsulation. So I think killing it at the firewall is also dying in the sense that infrastructural shit that we use shouldn't be on-prem probably, right? And so
what's wrong with putting Exchange on-prem, man? There's no health there.
Well, let's unpack that whole ball of wax. But no, I think, you're starting to see a time where going through that, and I'm fighting this fight, potentially with someone I'm working with. And it's like, why would you force all this traffic to go through the worst bottleneck you have, the most expensive single point of failure pipe, when you can do those type of things at SASE type cloud, multiple endpoints, multiple egress space, as long as you're working with a reputable vendor that's doing this in the right way. And again, that comes back to even the first challenges we've talked about, right, Shiva? But, I think the answer is going to come in the fact of not having to deal with the firewalls as that point of entry and tied to that single point of failure. Or even double. Let's say we make an HA. Well, what about the HA of having a BGP route, as long as you're not Facebook and somebody deletes your BGP tables, but having a BGP route that fills over 100 different IPs?
The timing.
I will get into the conspiracy theory on this one. I think this was a whistleblower kill on Facebook. Like
that's what I think. But what do I?
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. That was awful strange. Tangential, but the funniest shit to come out of that was that the global DDoS existed just on people hitting refresh on Facebook, so much so that Cloudflare took like a 90% increase in traffic. Yeah, like you had all this stuff just straight up from the DDoS of people requesting.
That was a education on addiction.
Dude, bro, right? Bro. Like for real. And I'm not a Facebook guy, I'm a LinkedIn guy, but I could promise you if your LinkedIn went down for half a day, man, my right eye'd be twitching. It'd be rough. Yeah.
I mean, I can't refresh on LinkedIn quite a few times a day.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress. But yeah, we've strained a bit off of topic here, I suppose. But back to the original question of what goes into a good disclosure program, I think it's really just having the hearts and minds to understand that humility says there's no way what you've built is good. Humility says there's no way my QA process is good enough. Humility says there's no chance that if I let this out to the world that I'm creating risk. And you can't just make these decisions based off of the regulatory risk. In fact, I have an article coming up in the Haunted Hacker magazine about, ignoring this regulatory risk that's been in your framework and thinking about it from a privacy risk perspective and what that does differently for a company and cost and all kinds of things as time goes. If you had 50 different privacy regulations and you're in 10 states, that means you're answering to at least 10 and a national one potentially. You might have 11 different standards you're trying to meet. Like with all enough teeth to put you out of business, you start getting into, should I even collect this data? Should I even store this data? Should I, right? And yeah. Anyways,
that's why I like the CMMC framework, and more so, what I like about that is the levels.
Yes, yeah,
and
1 through 5.
That's to me the best part about it. But data is too important, and it's too valuable for companies not to.
And it's not theirs. And it's not theirs. Oftentimes, companies are collecting other people's shit, OPS data, right? That it's literally my date of birth and my shit. And so when you start getting into that, that's where I think there's been a little bit of frivolity with a lot of companies around. How they treat data that's not even theirs. They're borrowing it. And that is what is driving the privacy, legislations, is this understanding of what's data worth and whose is it. But yeah, sorry, taking off your point. CMMC is a model that does get very much into, CUI, but it could be reclassified into a lot of things that aren't just necessarily controlled unclassified information. They could be privacy information. They could be all kinds.
The Secretary of DHS a couple of weeks ago said he wanted to implement a civilian version of CMMC.
100%. 100%. I get behind it fast. Yeah.
But I think if we go down that road of compliancy or security, whatever you want to call it these days,
it's a mix.
It's got to be national, because having to deal with multi-state jurisdiction plus federal, dude. Because imagine if you operated in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area.
You live under a few separate sets of standards.
That alone is enough to drive you crazy. So,
yeah. Well, gents, I appreciate y'all having me on. I got a back-to-back on.
You got it.
Everybody.
Where can people reach out to you if you want them to?
Oh, yeah, man. Always. LinkedIn, Cyber Matt Lee. YouTube, CyberMattLee, and also on cybermattlee.com. Is kind of a budding project that I suck at, but enjoy laughing at it as you go. Also, one thing is there's an October release for the company I work for. If you already know me, I talked about data and about CIS in the form of football, and I did hide an Easter egg. At least that's what I'm calling it after I messed up and didn't list one of the things. And so if anybody finds the Easter egg, please let me know and make fun of me appropriately. So that includes you two gentlemen. But if you do
challenge accepted, after I melted, you find it.
We're just we'll drop the link in the description for you guys to get to it, as well as any other way to get to Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, gents. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you, sir.